My name is Petia Whitmore, and I am a higher education executive turned entrepreneur. I was born and raised in Bulgaria, and I moved to the United States 20 years ago. I have a passion for education, and in some ways, graduate management education has been part of my life and career for the last 15 years. I launched a small venture called My MBA Path, and what I do now since the beginning of this year is I work with candidates to graduate business school. I have two ways in which I describe my MBA path. So like the formal way is that my MBA Path is an MBA admissions consulting service focused on empowering candidates with knowledge and guidance as they work on their application. And then the more poetic version of this statement is that my MBA Path is one former dean of MBA admission on a mission to create MBA success stories, one candidate at a time. This is a very interesting thing to think about and talk about because in my experience, candidates very often start with the wrong question. And the reason that happens is that depending on what they find most intimidating about the MBA application process, that's very often where they start. So if it's the GMAT, they start thinking about what GMAT score should I aim for? And that's not a bad question in and of itself. Or they start asking, well, do I have a chance of getting into one of the top 10 or top 15, whatever their desire might be, schools? That's also not a bad question, but in my opinion, these are not the questions that they should start with. The very first question that a candidate should start thinking about as they're considering going to graduate business school is really determining what's their why. What's their motivation? What's the driver behind that desire to go and spend a considerable time of your life and not talk about the cost, right? And get a graduate business degree. And in its most utilitarian sense, an MBA is a means to an end. It leads to professional advancement, personal development, increased income, but there's always more to the story than that. So it's really important to start thinking about your why. On my website, I suggest 7 questions that candidates can start asking themselves as they think about their why and their story. And they can, of course, be modified. There's nothing scientific about those 7 questions, but they're really questions along the lines of when in life have you been the saddest and the most joyful? Who shaped you? Who were your influences in life? What has been the most generous thing that you've ever done? What books have you read more than once? What is your biggest regret? I also have a favorite question that back in the day, a mentor of mine, a former Bain partner, asked me that at first shocked me, but it's actually a really valid question. It's how does the story end? And in the exercise that apparently some of the consulting firms use, it's a little bit more dramatic than that. It's about writing your own obituary as a way of trying to determine what do you want your life story to be, right? I mean, what do you want your impact to be? How do you want to be remembered? So I don't necessarily want candidates to take it that far, but how does the story end? I think it's a completely legitimate question that helps you understand what matters to you, why it matters to you. I'm almost starting to sound like the Stanford MBA essay, which is what matters most to you and why, but there's a reason they ask that question. Candidates should start with their story. The reason that's important is 2 parts. First, because it's going to help them make better decisions along the way. What school to apply to, what kind of program, what kind of community. It's going to help them clarify their career goals, right? And all of these things are also parts of what goes into your application. So knowing your story is going to help you be able to then extrapolate and put the appropriate pieces of that story into all components of the application, be it the admissions essays. When it's time for your interview, you're still gonna have your story to resort to. So that's why I think that starting with the why and starting with your story is really a very important part. And it's also an exercise that cannot be done fast. It's an iterative exercise that takes some serious thinking and requires time. You're not going to get it down to a really solid, truthful, substantial answer over the course of 1 hour. You're going to have to revisit it. You're going to have to think about it a lot. And for the candidates who are thinking of applying this fall, this is a perfect time to start. And this is where I would suggest they start. Choosing the right school is definitely a difficult task for candidates because there's so much information out there, and there are also so many programs. I think that there are about almost 1,000 accredited programs around the world. So it's not an easy task. And we all know the typical sort of household names almost, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the programs that are most immediately come to mind are the best fit for everyone. So I generally tell candidates to think about it along a simple framework that I call the 3 R's. And the 3 R's are reputation, reach, and relevance. And when it comes to reputation, what candidates most often think about is the rankings. The rankings are definitely a good place to get a sense of programs, but what the rankings truly tell you first and foremost is how competitive a program is. So that's important because then you can gauge whether or not you're a good fit. Can you have that profile that's truly competitive for the programs? But it shouldn't be the only place candidates look at, and it shouldn't be necessarily the first place that they consider. In order to assess reputation, they should also be speaking with alumni, with students, having a really candid conversation about what their goals were, what worked out to them, how the school helped, because that also goes into reputation. In the end, you want the program that is going to support your goals best, and that's not universal for everyone. And then for reach, I kind of split it into 2 parts. One is obviously geographical reach. You know where you want your post-MBA career to start after you finish graduate business school, and you want to make sure that your program has a certain reach in that area. Some programs have more of a regional reach, some have a national one, some are very well known globally, so that plays into it. And then relevance has to do both with your career. So does the program have the specializations, the flavor that will support your career goals? But also, does it have the features that really will provide the best environment for you? Some programs are larger, some are small and intimate, and truly not one size fits all. Some candidates prefer to be part of a very small program where they can sort of get to know everyone. Some prefer to be part of a much larger student body. And relevance also has to do with, again, a little bit with location in terms of where do you really like to spend the time while you're going to be studying, and then culture as well. Some programs are by nature more competitive, some are much more collaborative, and it's important to assess sort of like that relevance to your preferences and to the environment where you thrive. So that's how I advise students to start.